all have bias. To have bias does not mean one is racist, sexist, ageist, or any other ist. But we all have bias, and unconscious bias can be at work without our even realizing it. Even when we genuinely wish to treat all people equally, these ingrained stereotypes can affect our visual perception, attention, memory, and behavior. This can have an impact on how we treat patients, students, our colleagues, and everyone around us. Recognizing and understanding our biases is a critical first step to moving forward in creating spaces that are more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Today, in a session hosted jointly by the Benji Brooks and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committees of APSA, we have invited Jessica Halem to speak with all of us about this critical topic of bias and how bias works in our everyday lives. Jessica Halem is an MBA, and she is the LGBTQ Outreach and Engagement Director for the Harvard Medical School Sexual and Gender Minorities Health Equity Initiative. We are very pleased to have Jessica here today to start the critical conversation about bias in our daily lives with the APSA community.
This is so wonderful to be presenting this work with you today. My name is Jessica Halem. I am lucky to get to work at a place called Harvard Medical School, which is still, every time I think about it, shocking and amazing. I am not a clinician, and I think a lot about how organizations work. I think a lot about organizational change. I think a lot about personal change within the midst of that organization. And I think about how those two come together really to drive this work of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And this topic of bias is at the core of this work. So what are we going to do during this session? What do I want to do with you right now? So I am trying to help you see yourself as a part of this diversity and inclusion work. Maybe you already are. Maybe you serve on a committee. Maybe you're already a part of task forces. You know, we all work in places with plenty of committee work, right? So maybe this is something you already see a part of your life, but maybe you don't. Maybe you're wondering, how can I be a part of this diversity and inclusion work? I hear it talked about a lot. I see a lot of things happening. I don't quite see how I can do anything about it. You know, I'm a surgeon, I'm doing my work. This conversation today is about that. And we're going to talk about everyday forms of bias. So what I love about the conversation is these are just going to be things that are everyday forms of bias. This is not going to be rocket science. This is just going to be stuff that's going to feel very familiar and very regular to all of your lives, because bias is an important part of our life. It plays an important role, and we're just here to figure out how to harness it and be more sensitive and conscious of it. And then we're going to reflect on how it impacts our life. We're going to reflect on how we can become more sensitive and attuned to it. So let's start off with this exercise. Everybody take a minute, take a deep breath. Think about the room that you're in. Think about the noises outside your room. Maybe your family is making noise. Maybe there's traffic outside your door. Maybe you're at your workplace, your hospital office right now. This can be emotional work. This can be difficult work. This can bring up a lot of our own history, both negative and positive. So take a look at this slide, and I want you to think about yourself. This is just about you. This isn't about the issues at work or what drew you to join the session today. I just want you to think about yourself and look at all these spheres of life. These are all areas that we all possess. We have all of these. You could maybe turn some of these into a Venn diagram where they overlap about importance or what's in need of attention. What's a positive in your life? What is causing some of the harm or negative experiences in your life? So think about two things. Number one, when you enter into your workplace, whether that's for many of you a hospital or maybe association work that you do or other work that you do, think about walking into work and think about what is it that's important to you? What is it that you're thinking of? What sphere on this slide in front of you, what sphere for you is most present, right? When you walk into work, are you really aware that you're the chair? Is it your work role? Are you the resident? the student? Are you aware that you are the only surgeon in the room, right? And you walk in and it's a room full of all of the other medical personnel that work with you in the operating room? Are you aware of your gender when you walk into the room? Are you aware that you're the only man? You walked in and it's a room full of women, medical professionals, and you're the only man, and you're very aware of that. Do you walk in thinking about your religion? Is your religion something that's important to you at your workplace? Do you work at a religious institution? Thinking about your race when you walk into the room. Are you the only one of your race? Are you aware of people of a different race? Are you thinking about, do you have pride in your racial background and who you are? Do you think about your age? So when we walk into the room at work, what is it that you think about? Who are you? And then now think about at home or in personal spaces. Maybe we're not going out as much as we used to, but I think about when I walk around my town or when I walk into the grocery store. Is it apparent that my race is different here, is more present, is more front facing versus at work? Do I socialize with all women in my social life, but at work I'm surrounded by men? So here I want you to think about what foregrounds for you and what's in the background and how that changes, how things change to the foreground, to the background for you throughout your day, right? Throughout your very day, we are foregrounding and backgrounding different identities that we all hold. So this is going to be an important part of this conversation. And sometimes this is what this diversity and inclusion work ends up really focusing in on. But I want to start here and thinking about our own personal identities. Think about all of these spheres and who you are. So now let's talk about bias, right? So what is bias? We're going to talk about a bunch of different forms of bias. And I started this talk by saying everyday bias. These are everyday ways that our brains work. And we'll get to that in a minute. So this is one of my favorite forms of bias to talk about, conformity bias. And this is what you might call peer pressure or groupthink. But peer pressure, we're all familiar with this concept, but what does it actually mean? Well, what you're looking at in front of you is a study that has been done over and over again, and every time it has the same result. And I'll tell you what the study is. This image is put up in front of a group of people who've been invited into a room, and one person is the focus, and everybody else in the room is in on the study. And so this image is put in front of them, and 75% of the time, this is how it goes. Everybody is asked to say which matches exhibit 1. What does it match up with in exhibit 2? You do it right now. Think to yourself, okay, exhibit 1 and exhibit 2, which line does exhibit 1 match with on exhibit 2? And so the study goes that in that room, that everybody who's in on it, right, starts to say the wrong answer. And they say it with gusto, and they say it as a group, and one after another, everyone in the room says the wrong answer. And then they get to that one poor person who's not in on it, and this person changes their vote. And it happens over and over again that person might have voted correctly, right? Exhibit 1 matches A, right? We can all see that with our own 2 eyes. But after a while in this room, over and over again, if enough people say, nope, it's B, your mind's playing tricks on you, nope, it's B, and over again, people are saying a different answer. And you can even imagine how this goes, all the reasons, the hierarchy, who you are, right? You can imagine all the ways that peer pressure can play into this, and it happens all the time. Conformity bias, how the group can get us to actually change what we see. The beauty bias. This is one of my favorite conversations to have, especially in the world of diversity and inclusion, which is that we like pretty people It's just a fact. Handsome men, we like beautiful women. It doesn't have to be about attraction or sexuality at all. It's about admiring, right? It's about looking at someone who's in good shape, someone who takes care of themselves, beautiful skin, beautiful hair, right? And the most interesting and well discussed study you've probably heard is this incredible statistic that I include here, which is that in the United States, of the men who are Fortune 500 CEOs, which is the majority of CEOs, that 58% are over 6 feet tall. But in the US, the population of men are only 14.5% over 6 feet tall. So, I mean, just think about that, right? Are tall people smarter? Do tall people know more? Why do we think that tall people are smarter? Why would tall people have more advantages, right? There's a lot to unpack there, but the statistic affirms what we know about the beauty bias, that we have a bias towards people who fit sort of conforming notions of beauty and handsome standards. This is a very interesting bias that plays into a lot of our thinking. And you can even see now where it starts to feed into our leaders. The affinity bias. I work at a place called Harvard. I'm the first to tell you this is a bias I see every day. The affinity bias. We enjoy being with people where we have things in common with them. And this is this form of bias where I say to you, and of course, it's a shortcut. That makes total sense. You look at a resume for hiring people. You look at the residents. Imagine you're serving on your residency committee. You're choosing next year's applications for residency, and you see resident applications from the medical school that you went to school. You see Harvard. You went to Harvard. You see Harvard. You see whatever the school is. Maybe it's a school that you think doesn't get enough attention, that you know is an underdog that nobody thinks of, but you're from there. You know it's a great school, right? You're proud of being from that school. Of course, you have an affinity for people who went to the same school. You have an affinity for people that you have things in common with. You like to fish. I love to fish. We can talk about fishing. So we have an affinity for people where we share things in common, places we went to school, attributes, hobbies that we have. And you can start to see how this starts to then become quickly about other things that we might share in common, right? Oh, we went to the same summer camp. Oh, we're of the same religion. Oh, we share the same family structure, right? I'm a single mom. You can start to see how this creates bonds, quickness to be able to connect with people. The halo effect. This is a good one for leaders to reflect on, the halo effect. And this is one of those, this is a form of bias, right? We are biased towards when someone has done something great, a huge accomplishment. Well, we start to see that all of their work is great, right? Well, this person won an award for mentoring. They must be a wonderful mentor. I start to see all of their words of wisdom as great. Well, look, they won an award. It's a wonderful thing to win awards. It's a wonderful thing to be recognized for your accomplishments. But does that create a halo, a glow about you that then everything you do is seen through that positive glow? And where are we then as someone who might have the halo effect, someone who was highly accomplished at a young age, perhaps? Am I not getting critical feedback? Am I not getting the kind of constructive feedback that I need to get better? Don't we all want to get better? Don't we all need to have our work improve? You could see how this could be both a positive, great, I've been affirmed as a smart person, and then you can also see how it becomes a negative. Well, some of my traits don't get seen. I can get away with things. People don't believe me when I comment about someone who has this halo effect. Oh, they're a great person. They've won awards. How could they have done anything wrong? The opposite of this is that horn effect. When someone's done something bad or wrong or a huge screw up, and how do we not let that cloud our judgment about them forever? And this, we see it all the time at work, right? It's hard not to see that big screw up and not to be, listen a little bit more carefully or be more attuned, or you're looking out. Oh, well, are they going to screw up again? Was that a one-time deal, or do they really not know what they're doing? In surgery, this can have huge impacts, huge effects on people's careers. What happens when we make a huge mistake? How do we ever come out from under that? This is this horn effect, we call it, right? This devil horns. Someone did something bad. Somebody did something wrong, and it affects our impression of them. Just, it keeps affecting everything we see through this lens. The similarity bias, similar to the affinity bias, right? So affinity, what I like to remember about that is about attributes, right? College, summer camp, hobbies. But similarity really is this bias that we start to talk about when it comes to, all right, those identities, right? Where we start to feel like, well, other mothers know what I'm going through. So I like to work with women who are mothers because we have similar experiences, and I like to surround myself with them. You can start to see here where this is okay. This is what we do. But when does it start to become a problem? So of course we want to surround ourselves with people that are similar to us. But when does that become a bias where then we start to not see other people, or maybe there is no room for other people? Are we only surrounding ourselves with people who are similar to us? So we see how it can be a positive thing. I'm a part of the LGBTQ community, right? I'm a part of a marginalized minority group. Wherever I go, every workplace, I want to surround myself with similar people. We have lunches, we have events. It feels good. I can let down my hair. But where does that start to impact our work? Right? Is that how we choose our teams? Is that how we make hiring decisions? Or is that something that we're sensitive to and become more aware of? The similarity bias is really where we start to see some of the two sides of this coin. The contrast effect. Oh, this is a good one. This is such a powerful bias. And I see it every day. I see it in hiring practices every day. And this example I have up there, if you're looking at a number of resumes or interviews in a row, one after the other, we tend to compare one resume to the other. Well, of course we do. That's a contrast. It just totally makes sense. Think about it. We do this all the time in residency interviews. Of course, you only have a certain amount of time to interview people, and you set up your interviews one after the other, right? Or you all sit down as a committee with your stack of resumes. All right, we're going to review these resumes. And you start to read resumes and you make piles. Oh, I like this person. You put them in a good pile. Oh, this. And then what starts to happen? You think about this resume situation. You got a real gem of a resume. You got somebody who's above and beyond the qualifications you even listed in the job. They've got more than we even thought to think of for this job, and they're willing to do it. Look at what a great candidate they are. And then we start to look at all the resumes after them, and they pale in comparison to that person. Now, at first blush, this might feel like a very good way to control your time for interviewing and looking at resumes. But what have you lost? So now you're no longer comparing resumes to the actual job qualifications that you painstakingly wrote. You're comparing resumes to each other. So this contrast effect becomes very powerful in creating an automatic listing of your candidates instead of, again, judging candidates by the job that you're hiring for, and instead you're judging them against each other. And think about how you could have a candidate in that pile that has qualifications or experiences that you hadn't even asked for. So now, right, that starting line changed. But is that the fair way to judge these other candidates? Attribution bias. This is a good one for reflecting on ourselves. When we do something well, we think it is because of our own merit and personality. When we do something badly, we believe that it is due to external factors. We think the opposite for others. Think about that again. When we do something well, we think about all of the experiences that we brought to it, all of the studying we did, all of the long nights and the long days. We think about all of our own intrinsic factors that prove that we did that well, that show that lend itself. Of course, I knocked it out of the park. I've got 20 years of experience. I stayed up all night. I've read every book. You know, I'm a great listener. Of course I did well. But when something goes badly, when something goes wrong, as it does, well, we know that we can find the extrinsic factors that led to that. Well, I didn't have all the information. I wasn't supported. We can think of all of the external factors that lent itself to something going badly. And that is a totally real, human, very wonderful way to understand yourself. But this is where the research comes in. We do the opposite for other people. Oh, Susie screwed up. She doesn't know the material. Susie screwed up. She wasn't listening. This idea that we are so quick to appreciate the intrinsic and extrinsic factors that go into our success and failures on a personal level. But when it comes to other people, we are very quick and we tend to focus on their intrinsic values at all times for failures. And then when they do something well, you can imagine, Susie did great. Well, I trained her. Susie did great on that. Well, you know, I taught her everything she knows, right? I mean, you can start to see how this is very real and starts to play out into our lives. Confirmation bias. When we make a judgment about another person, we subconsciously look for evidence to back up on our own opinions of that person. We do this because we want to believe we are right and we've made the right assessment of a person. So confirmation bias, this happens all the time. For those of you in science, this might sound very familiar. We are very, very sensitive to this more and more. And I want to remind us that it happens with people. So you hired Susie. Susie was the person you fought for on that committee. And then, and you made that original assessment and everything Susie does is great. You feel really great because you want your opinion to have been great. You want your assessment of people to be great and for that to be affirmed. So confirmation bias plays out in many aspects of our lives, and it's something that can have a very serious effect in science, but it works also in people as well. We make decisions about people. We make positive or negative judgments of somebody, and it's hard for it not to just consistently be the path that we go on to be backed up in our opinion, right? Either because of what we think we want people to think about us, or because that's just how our brains work, right? We look for this evidence that backs up that judgment we made. We see what affirms the original judgment we made, right? So that expression, we see what we want to see. It's more, we see what affirms what we originally saw. What is this all about? What is bias? Bias is an everyday action that our brains make because we have to make quick decisions. Thankfully, we have brains that have bias. Thankfully, we do. All of those biases that we just discussed work in our favor to stay alive every day. We make decisions about, is it safe to cross the road? Is that stove hot? Is that person going to kill me or not? Right? This fight or flight emotional reaction saves our life and has since we, came up from the swamp. That part of our brain where our emotions live allows us to make very quick responses. And what you know now about implicit or unconscious bias is that's where it lives. It lives in that part of the brain that's making the very quick association. It's attaching an emotion to a memory, to a response, so that we can stay alive. And unfortunately, it also happens around everyday acts in the workplace, of everyday interactions. And so that automatic response that we are unaware of, we are unconscious of, that's happening without our even choice. It's happening so quickly, we don't even know it's happening. And so thinking about bias is about moving from that part of the brain to the other part of our brain, the front part of our brain, the rational, the advanced brain, the place where we make reason and decisions, where we make plans. But those are two different parts of the brain. And your job when you think about bias and all of the quick ways that we are making these judgments and deciding if this is friend or foe or good or bad, all of that is working in our emotional response. And so then what do we do? How do we fight this? How do we live with bias? All of those biases we just discussed are not going away. This is not about getting rid of them. This is about becoming aware of them and slowing down our brain function, slowing down our emotional response, slowing down, and instead trying to move to that front part, that smart part of our brain that makes good decisions. This is called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is your ability to know that bias exists in every moment of every life, of every moment of every day, of every job, of every surgery. You know how to do surgery just by touch, I guarantee you. You're working in a part of your brain that isn't even, you're not even aware of the processing, right? It's this fast response. So this bias when it comes to people is of course where these negative responses, where these unhealthy responses, where we're not able to move away from those original biases and into a place of making thoughtful, rational decisions. So what's so wrong with all of this? How is this a bad thing? Why are we even talking about this? Well, it sounds like, Jessica, all these biases are a good thing. It sounds like it's helping me surround myself with people that I like and people that I'm going to have fun with and people who understand me. And of course, we want to surround ourselves with people who understand us. But when we are working in workplaces with power and hierarchies and jobs to be done, we see how that bubble of who we surround ourselves by or who we think well of becomes a bubble that looks a lot like us. And that's as simple as I can say it. We create spaces and teams and departments and hospitals that end up just looking a lot like us. We end up surrounding ourselves by people a lot like us. And we make some of these very quick choices and judgments about some of these bubbles that are very new to us or different. Or I might have been trained, my brain might be getting some negative messaging every day since I'm born that I'm making a judgment about. So this is where we think about things like racial bias, gender bias, where we think about bias against people who are gay or lesbian, where we have bias against people who are transgender, where we think about bias against people of a different religion, bias against people who didn't go to my fancy medical school, right? We think about class. And we start to see where our negative associations with some of these groups informs those quick bias choices that we make when we have positions of power and we're putting together opportunities or teams. In this discussion part of this, we want to reflect upon where these biases are a positive and where they are not serving us well. Where are these biases not serving us well? Where have we had a bad experience? As a woman in medicine, where have you experienced bias? As a person of a different ethnicity or religion than the majority at the hospital you work in, where has it been a positive experience? How has your workplace helped to affirm some of these parts of your identity and bolstered you and helped other people to understand you? So start to think about the positive ways that bias has played into your life and start to think about some of the negative ways that has played into your life. And that's where we can start our discussion.
We have a couple questions that we have formed for you, Jessica, and thank you very much again for that great talk. It was very enlightening. The first question is, have you been able to examine your admission committee's unconscious biases and acknowledge them so that you've been able to improve the pipeline of minority trainees?
Well, thanks. That's a great question. And I really appreciate the group of you putting together some questions. And I want to start by saying I'm going to walk through this question with you to help you start to see how to implement this work. So I want to start by answering this question by saying it's a huge question. And I want to just take a minute after we just watched that wonderful speaker, Jessica Halem's talk. She had great hair. She was in a totally different place. I just want to just recognize that what you have asked is huge. And that our admissions committees, our hiring committees, have been operating in very structured ways for a very long time. And that asking committees like this to reflect on the role of bias in their decision-making is a huge endeavor. So it's actually twofold. So your first takeaway of this question is admitting that we have biases. So your first step as an individual is to admit that we have biases. And then our second step is to say out loud as a committee, every time we get together, let's take a minute to remember our very human, normal brain biases. And let's put those on the table and say it every time we start. Start off every meeting with an intentionality to be cognizant and aware of our biases. So what some of the research shows is even just saying it out loud every time can help us short circuit some of those biases. What we try to offer is what are some practices, some guiding principles that we could remind ourselves of at the start of every meeting. Let's say it out loud at the top of every meeting. We are human, we have biases, we're going to check ourselves. One of the other pieces of examining our biases and trying to short circuit our biases is saying out loud as a team every time, we believe that diversity matters. We believe that our future trainees, our future students, our future fellows and hires should look like the world and the future of medicine that we want to see. And just saying out loud, we want to look and operate differently. I mean, operate in the team sense. I'm not going to tell you all how to do your surgeries yet. So the second takeaway is to say, we want to look and be different. We want to include and listen to voices who are not at this table. We believe that we will be better together. That's a slogan we use these days. Then we can start the work of examining our biases. And it just then gives permission. So then that third piece is, how will we give permission to the members of our team to raise their hand and say, hey, I wonder if something's operating right now in this team environment. We're looking at a lot of resumes from the same schools. We're looking at a lot of resumes that are all male. We're looking at a lot of resumes in which I do not know the race or ethnicity of our candidates. So it's creating some guidelines as a committee is our first step in doing this. Number one, admitting we have a bias. Number two, pledging that we believe that we should look and operate differently. And number three, how do we give each other permission to raise our hand, give a timeout, and say, something's going on here. I don't have all the answers, but something's going on.
Jessica, so as a trainee, what are some strategies for acknowledging and pointing out biases on our teams, specifically when we maybe don't feel like we have any power? And then conversely, when you're in a position of power, how do you support all members of your team to be able to speak up and acknowledge those?
It's a great question. And I really love hearing from trainees because I think that's really right where the rubber hits the road. In this deeply hierarchical, deeply embedded power structure that you all work in, it's number one, most important to just, again, say it out loud. We are working in a deeply hierarchical, deeply entrenched power structure where all of that most of the time works to the patient's benefit. That's how your operating room operates. That's how I love this stories about, that's how a code operates. When you go to a code, you need to know who's running the code. Everybody knows where they are in the line, in the system. We are thankful that nurses know their role. The medical assistant knows their role. The anesthesiologist knows their role. Everybody has a role. That's a good thing. So now we want to just honor that and say, as a trainee, it is usually not appropriate for me to correct anyone. I'm in a learning mode. I don't know everything, and that's okay. We have to start by honoring that there's a reason why you're still the trainee. You don't know everything yet, but you do know some things. And it's first most important to recognize that no matter who you are in that team, everybody knows something that someone else doesn't. That doesn't mean you know everything. And it also means that the person at the top doesn't know everything. They know some things, but not everything. So your question, I'm actually going to force it in reverse, which is the answer to your question, is that all of this begins with those with power saying first, how can I be of service to others? We are here in a pivotal moment for America in honoring and standing up for Black lives. Well, who needs to stand up first? White people. I, as a white person, it's my job with more power and privilege to stand up first and to disrupt what's happening first in honor of those who have less power or whose voices have been taken away, whose various lives have been taken away. That's similar. I am in a position of power. It's my job to walk into the room and say, how can I be of service today for the greater good? Trainees, I want you to interrupt me when I mispronoun you. Trainees, I want you to interrupt me if you see bias working. I want you to know I am here to keep learning. We don't all know everything about bias and discrimination. We don't all know everything about racism and sexism. That's a good thing. We're still learning. So raise your hand and say, I'm still learning, interrupt me. So it's important for the person in power to lead the way. So as a trainee, one of the ways you could do that is, how would you like me to point out areas where I think there's something to learn when the stakes are low, before it's happened, right? Everybody's on an even playing field. You're feeling good and you say, hey, while we're talking, I'd love to know, how would you like for me to raise issues or concerns I might have on the team? Thank you for giving me feedback as a learner. Now, I would love to know, how should I give you feedback if it's needed? Is that something you're comfortable with? And if so, how could I do it in a positive way so that you could really hear me?
In trying to tackle bias and grow inclusions on our committees or other situations, I sometimes get the response back that you're just suggesting that person because they're a woman or Black or trans, and we should really just focus on the best person for the committee. Any suggestions as to how to respond other than stating that I think that all of these people are qualified, or I wouldn't suggest them, when the truth is I am suggesting them to increase our diversity?
I love this question. I love the statements, best fit, hit the ground running, we'll get along, we'll all get along. I love naming that. And so I will say this, some workplaces have actually really tried to rewrite those sentences to even before they're used. So for instance, in our HR department, we really try to help people never use the phrase hit the ground running. It's like these hiring practices take so long. All you want to do is to hire the person and never have to train them. Well, that's ridiculous. Let's just step back for a minute. Everybody needs 6 months of training. Everybody needs 6 months to get their sea legs. Everyone deserves time to be a listening mode before they start being a fully productive member of a committee. So let's take it down a notch from best fit, hit the ground running, we'll all get along, and instead start to look at the work of the transition period as the work. That I think too often we look at our committees as workhorses and instead see them as opportunities of the process of working together as just as important as the product we're trying to create in our committee structures. And that if we took the time to actually check in with each other, help each other grow, learn the acronyms or the things that we just say all the time because they've always been said, if we start to bring each other along as an important part of a process, then it doesn't feel like you've created two categories, the work of a committee and inclusion. And what if I actually said to you, inclusion is the work, belonging is the work on every committee? And so then if we start to slow down and get more intentional about who we are and how we operate, how we bring everybody up from learning more of each other's history, the history of the committee, all the things that, we are shortcuts, right? Oh, we've been on this committee for 3 years, we just shortcut things. What if we saw every day as the work of the committee and not getting to the work? When people express anxiety about inclusion or hiring people that look different than them as taking away from the hard work, I think they're afraid of doing the hard work of expanding what's even possible. If you think that this is the work and you're just trying to hire some people that look different to do the same work, well, I actually am going to say, don't bother hiring and trying to find minority people because you're not going to benefit. You actually have to want the work to expand and deepen and change because different ideas are at the table. Different voices are at the table. So if you look at who you're bringing to the table, and then we're going to co-create the work together, that's where then we release this anxiety that we know where we're supposed to be. Heck, if you guys know what the answers are, why the hell do we have a committee? If you already know what the work is, just go do it. I don't need to be on a committee. Don't hire me, your queer person. Don't hire me, a woman, just because you think I should be there. Just go do the work. Save me the trouble. There are a lot of Black people right now watching this saying, I don't need to be on your committee. I've done a lot of work already. Us white people could just do the work, right? Just do some work. Find the interesting new voices that are going to look, maybe they all look the same. I don't know. Different voices, different ideas can look and come in different packages.
That's outstanding. Thank you so much. I think that's very inspirational and a great way to challenge our colleagues as we move forward to take the deep look into ourselves as to the biases we hold and how it impacts us, and to do that work of bringing in new voices and expanding what we can do because we've expanded our community.
Thanks so much to everybody who helped put this on, and check your biases.